All right, so I'm scrolling through Twitter today and I see this thread by Travis Etienne, right? Then I see the trade and I have to squint. Javonte Williams and a 25 first for Travis Etienne. No context. Didn't really read through the thread, but there's nothing in there that talks about the format, the number of starters, the scoring, none of that. No context at all. Just buy Travis Etienne and give up my 25 first and Javonte Williams to do it. So I'm like, you know what? You can look up the sleeper information. You can look up based on sleeper IDs. You can find the league. You can look at the scoring distribution. You can look at the warp distribution. You can look at the roster construction. Is this really good advice? And this isn't a dig at the person that made the tweet, but this is what you see on Twitter. This is the dynasty trash that you see on Twitter by Travis Etienne. There's no context. There's nothing about the format. There's no understanding of leverage, strategy, nothing. It's just a screenshot for engagement and clicks. And there's probably people that see this and go, oh, you know what? That's somebody with a following. They have an extra first. They can throw it out there with Javonte Williams and buy Travis Etienne. Is this actually a smart dynasty trade? So now we dive a little bit deeper into this actual league format. So I looked it up. This is a 12-team Superflex start 9. Fairly shallow rosters, too. We're not looking at rosters that are like 30, 35 deep. So right there, you can get the context. It's a start 9. So to be a difference maker, right, if you're throwing in a first into this trade to get a running back, pivoting from another running back. So you're adding a first to a running back to get another running back. You already know the threshold of what you have to hit is pretty high to actually make a difference in a start 9. And I'll show you the warp here in just a second on why that checks out. But then you look at these two players and you go, okay, is it really this the best I can do when I throw in my 25 first? Now, RotoSurgeon still has his 24 first, but even throwing in a 25 first, and a lot of people will say, oh, that's 2 years away. Don't care about 2025 first. I can always get that back. People that say they can always get it back, they clearly do not value draft picks right now, probably how they should. You really think you're going to get it back in a year unless you pay more? So you're probably losing market if you trade away a 25 first like this far away because you say I can get it back. If that's part of your justification, you're probably never going to value picks enough to be able to actually get it back at a better price than what you sold it. B, what else could you have done with this? And was this the move to make in July? Is there another trade you could have done at a later time when maybe you've actually seen the warp being produced? Could you get that trade then? How about in a year? Could you get more in this type of trade then? Or is it I just had to do it right now? And I think that's one of the problems. As you can see, process over players. This is bad process to make a deal like this. So let's jump into exactly why. So I'm going to show you extra warp information so you can see exactly what I'm talking about. So here is the warp from 2022 in this league. So 2022, as you can see here, turquoise blue, you have the running back distribution. RB6, you're talking about 0.8 warp. 0.8 warp from RB6. And then you look at the distribution all the way down until RB30, you're at 0 warp. So between RB6 and RB30, you're talking between 0 and 0.8 wins above replacement. So that tells me a couple things. One, it's a start 9. It makes sense. You're only actually capturing this warp if you have the players in your starting lineup. That's the first thing. The second thing, it's still extremely flat when you're talking about above replacement in this range because it's a start 9. It's shallow to where it's actually going to flatten off a lot quicker than it would maybe in a deeper league because you look specifically at the running backs ahead of this. You have the RB1, you're talking about 2 wins above replacement. You have a top 3 running back, you're talking about 1.6 or higher wins above replacement. And then it's a stark drop-off. So right there, just looking at the distribution of warp from 2022, essentially, you can already tell I've traded away a running back that probably fits somewhere in this range between 0 and 0.8 warp for another running back that is in the same range, and I've tacked on a first. And I've traded that first 2 years out. So this is where you get conviction on a player, but it's not the right format to get a conviction on a player. If this is a league where maybe the scoring is more running back friendly, or it's a slightly different format, maybe it's an extra starter, maybe it's a different type of scoring, or maybe it's a format where running back premium is at a premium and you could have some sort of justification on why one player over another, then fine. I can't even really think of it because I'm not necessarily looking at Travis Etienne versus Javonte Williams and seeing that much different. And I don't like Javonte Williams. I've talked about it on Destination Dynasty before. He's one of the least efficient running backs in the league. He's coming off a serious injury, but that still doesn't mean he probably doesn't project somewhere in this range where it's just extremely flat. So once you know that, now you sit there and you look, okay, was this a smart trade just from a warp perspective? No. And the data backs it up. Unless you are upgrading to a clear running back that has top 6 or better ceiling at least. And I wouldn't even say top 6. I would say if you finish top 6 here, you're probably not getting what you could have got potentially later on by throwing that first into another trade. Would you have been better off, even if it's a non-tight end premium, would you have been better off adding to get Travis Kelce, to get Mark Andrews, to maybe go get an upgrade at receiver? Because as you can see, if you can make a move like that, even going from wide receiver, I don't know, wide receiver 12 to wide receiver 4 gives you a pretty decent bump in warp. Now, does that move I necessarily want to rush to make? Again, for the same reason, no, because it's an anti-leverage trade. But you can see here where the drop-offs are and where the spikes are. Tight ends, clearly it spikes. And as you can also see at tight end, it drops below 0 once you get to tight end 5, tight end 6. And that's pretty standard regardless of the premium. You're going to see this similar distribution. And then obviously at quarterback, man, if you can hit on one of those top 3, top 4 quarterbacks, even if you're trading away a Justin Fields or Joe Burrow or Justin Herbert, you know, right here, you have Joe Burrow right around 1.8 warp last year, but you still have Pat Mahomes, Jalen Hurts. You have those guys above 2. So if you can go from somebody like Trevor Lawrence or Justin Herbert to a Jalen Hurts or Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes, and you get anything close to what you got last year, you're actually getting a much bigger advantage if you make a move like that at quarterback. Now, maybe it wasn't available, but again, you can just see with this distribution, it makes no sense to make this kind of bet in this league at this position. So then you dive a little bit deeper. You look a little bit further into the specifics of this team that made this trade. So you go to, there's the warp graph. Shout out to the warp chart over at South Harmon. It's southharmonff.com. You can check out their warp tool over there. But here's the team. So here's RotoSurgeon's roster, right? Shout out. This is the Dynasty Daddy. I'm going to throw the Dynasty Daddy banner up there. Just because they are a sponsor of Dynasty Trades in 5. So there's the Dynasty Daddy banner. Shout out dynasty-daddy.com. You could pull your team up using your sleeper ID or league ID, and you can look at this distribution. So this is RotoSurgeon's roster, right? So you can see Travis Etienne already has Saquon Barkley, so you can argue Travis Etienne is his RB2. Now, I can justify maybe trading for another running back on this team, but you also had Joe Mixon, and you look at Joe Mixon and Travis Etienne, you probably say, you know what, for at least the short term, not that big of a difference here. And it kind of goes down to the principles that I talked about last week on Twitter about running backs. Running backs these days, when you're talking about low warp running backs, I don't care how old a guy is. I don't care if he's 22, 23, 26, 28. When you're talking low warp running backs, I don't care about their outlook 3 years from now. I don't care if they can give me a 0.5 warp in 2024 or 2025. It doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. It's not impacting your team. I mean, you go back to that warp chart and you can see you have an elite quarterback, you have an elite tight end, you have the difference-making receivers. They're blowing everything else away in terms of warp unless you have one of the elite running backs. And it's fair to say Travis Etienne is just not that. So you look at this trade and then you look at this roster and you go, okay, so according to Dynasty Daddy, this roster, overall roster value, you can see right here, 10th lowest roster value in the league, lowest draft capital in the league. So after the trade, now we have the lowest amount of draft capital in the league. Starter rank. So it ranks you by starters. So it gives you overall rank, which is the overall rank of your entire league. So this is actually a 10-team league. Overall rank, 10th out of 10. Starter rank, 9 out of 10. Quarterback rank, okay, 3rd out of 10. Now, the one flaw with the rankings here is it will give you overall value at quarterbacks. Obviously here, Justin Fields, CJ Stroud, Trey Lance, Will Levis, you're getting credit for having essentially 4 quarterbacks, even though the quality probably isn't as high as some other teams. But then you look at the RB rank, 3rd at RB. So we have Saquon Barkley, Travis Etienne, Joe Mixon, Damian Harris, Devon Achane. That's fine. But the idea is, do we need to make this trade right now? This is a team that, according to Dynasty Daddy's own tiers, 3 contenders, 4 frisky teams, 2 frauds, and a trust the process. RotoSurgeon comes in as a fraud. Then you look at the team that got the deal done, right? So this was Zach 10. Zach 10 already has Justin Herbert, Kyler Murray, Baker Mayfield. So maybe struggling a little bit, QB2, depending on Kyler this year. Running backs clearly has already moved on from Javonte Williams on this team, which is cool. But running backs clearly kind of embracing the, I don't necessarily need to have a high-end running back, but I'm going to collect picks. I've collected an extra 2025 first because of this deal. But I also have Jamar Chase, Kyle Pitts, Mark Andrews, Evan Ingram. Now I have a trade chip probably in Kyle Pitts or Mark Andrews, DK Metcalf, Jordan Addison, Chris Godwin. The idea is this team overall roster value and overall value, #1 in the league. Starter rank 6, other than running backs, top 6 in everything. Best tight ends, most draft capital, overall value, top 5 QB room, just lacking running backs. So then you just look at that and you go, I didn't know anything about the context of the team. But you can also argue that Zach 10 in this deal is better than Rotosurgeon already. And now you've punted 2 years out on a team that will be rolling out a rookie quarterback this year in CJ Stroud, betting on Trey Lance and Will Levis to have a QB3. But then you're also sitting here also betting on Joe Mixon and Saquon Barkley, along with Terry McLaurin, Marquise Brown, Dallas Goedert. So sure, do you have a 2-year window with a couple of the goes? Yeah. But I'm giving away a first 2 years out on a team that arguably is in the bottom 3 of the league to a team that's already stronger than me. So then you go back to the trade for Zach and you go, okay, did Zach really hurt his team with what we talked about with the warp chart? So we'll go back to the warp chart just so everybody can see that one more time. So again, the warp chart right here. Again, shout out to South Harmon. Did Zach really give up anything by trading away that Travis Etienne share, turning Javonte Williams into even more draft capital, adding an extra 25 first, especially in a league where I can now stash picks for the future, and I can probably go, you know what, if I ever need a running back, guess what I can probably buy in a year when I need something like Javonte Williams? I can probably go buy, I don't know, someone like Joe Mixon or somebody that can give me a 1 to 2 year window of exactly the warp that Javonte Williams and Travis Etienne are probably going to give me. Again, referenced here in this chart between 0 and 0.8 warp of wins above replacement last year. And again, this is a start 9. So in a start 9, in a 10-team start 9, it is so consolidated that you better be right on picking the players. So masked in this original trade, and I'm going to go back to the original trade as I end the video, masked in this original trade here, and here it is, with the headline, by Travis Etienne. Again, no context. Even I didn't even know it was a 12-team or a 10-team league until I actually pulled up the league. No context. 10 teams, start 9, Superflex. So extremely shallow, which you know the warp is going to flatten off extremely quickly. And I essentially bet on 2 running backs that are basically in the same dead zone. And it's not the typical dead zone that you hear in redraft. It is literally a dead zone that it's just going to be very hard to escape unless you are literally Austin Eckler, Christian McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley. Like that's what Travis Etienne has to be to outrun the leverage that you gave up in this trade. So a lot of people that scroll past this, they see, oh, you know what? That's a fair price for Travis Etienne. But then you dive deeper into not just the format, not just the settings, not just that it's a 10-team start 9, and you essentially threw in your first just for a player preference. Let's call a spade here. This is one of those, you know what? I just like this player. So if that's the analysis, fine, but it's not by Travis Etienne. It's, I love Travis Etienne and I'm going to trade him and I don't care about the process, because this is definitely a player over process deal that was made. And then you dive further and you look at the context of the rosters. It just doesn't make sense. So you have to think about when you see a deal like this, dive deeper. And I'm going to try to do more of these just with these type of things you see on Twitter, because I think this is a bigger impact on the market than we think. There's a bunch of tools out there. Again, I use Dynasty Daddy, dynasty-daddy.com. Use South Harmon's Warp tool, southharmonff.com/warp. You can check out the tool there. I use those tools, but a lot of people don't dive that deep. They just see a headline, they read a thread, and they go, you know what, I'm going to go offer that in my league. And a 10-team start 9 versus a 12-team start 12 in the distribution of the warp across the league at all 4 positions, it's just not the same. At that point, the players don't even matter. A player in one format could be absolutely relevant. It could be absolutely relevant making an anti-leverage trade. In another format, it makes absolutely no sense. And in this context, you basically just threw in a first for a preference. And it wasn't even that first is going to turn into a high warp player, because again, in a shallow league, it's hard to get there. But you have to question, what was the opportunity cost of what I couldn't gotten back, or what else I could have done with that 25 first? At a later time, at a different time, could I have bought a running back during the season? Could I have bought Derrick Henry halfway through next year for a random first, because the person might actually want to get out on a player like that? And that would have been a better use of this first than it would have been making this type of trade now. Because the other downside that I didn't really talk about is, what if you're wrong on both players? What if both players just end up being absolutely nothing burgers? And that's most likely, is they just fall outside of the relevant warp range. Then you gave away a free first. But what if you're wrong? What if you gave up Javonte Williams for Travis Etienne and you gave up the first, and Javonte ends up being even better than Travis Etienne? Boom. The team that got the 2, that got the leverage, ends up smashing. So hopefully everybody enjoyed this one. Quick video. Shout out to Clay and Shane, co-hosts on Dynasty Trades in 5. But definitely one of those. This was a players over process trade. I don't like it. And partially it's not because of the person that put out the tweet. It's because there's no context to it. And it's leading dynasty managers astray. If they are trying to consume hardcore dynasty content and they don't understand leverage, they don't understand warp, they don't understand positional value and distribution across different formats, they're going to be misled when they see a trade like this come across their Twitter timeline. Follow me on Twitter at CharlesChillFFB. Everything at Destination Devi is where you can find my podcast. And then obviously Trades in 5 live stream every Tuesday night, 8:30 to 10 live on the YouTube feed. Check it out. Appreciate y'all. Be chill.